What am I saying again?
This is MPW, the podcast
with your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the MPW Podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and I'm here with the amazing Catherine Marks. So, Catherine, for those who don't know, is a Grammy-winning producer and engineer, and also won the MPG Best Producer of the Year. So, very excited that she's here today. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Xylo. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Absolute pleasure. So how are you doing today? We're here on a Monday morning. It sounds like it was a very busy weekend just working for you, but...
Yeah, I was in the studio all weekend. But, sometimes things have to get done. So you've got to put in the hours.
Yeah, that is true. So our topic today, we're talking about music production and what exactly it is. But before we jump into that, just wanted to talk a bit about you. And, I read a few things. So you started off learning architecture, or that's what you were doing. And then you've ended up in music and music production specifically. And you worked with some amazing artists, including, the Killers, Foals and Kanye West as well. And how did that journey come about? Because it seems like a very big transition.
Well, yes. So coming out of school, working in the music industry was not on my radar, or it was not provided as an option. Or yes, I guess there was I could see no easy path into that, nor did I really understand what the music industry involved. I knew that I wanted to work in music or do something involved in music, whether it was playing in bands or whatever. So I enrolled to do architecture instead. But I'd also really been interested, I loved art and maths and sciences at school, and architecture felt like that was something that combined all of those things. How I eventually got into this situation that I'm in now, I studied architecture for 3 years. The architecture degree is divided up into two sections. First section is building, planning and design, and then you do a year out in the workforce as like a real life. Yeah, exactly. And then you go back and finish your degree. So I did my year out in Dublin in Ireland, and the reason I did that was because my mum is from Ireland, but I just, for some reason, I felt like there were so many students coming out into the workforce that year or looking for internships, and I felt that perhaps it would be quite tricky to get a job, so I thought I should go to another country to try and get a job.
Fair enough. Makes sense.
And it was just one random phone call one night, and I just searched for a load of architecture firms in Dublin and spoke to a woman, and she was really lovely, and I sent her my CV and some stuff, and she ended up giving me a job. So I got my Irish passport and moved to Ireland for a year. Dublin is a very small city, and this was in 2001. And in a way to meet new people and stuff, because I didn't really know many people, I was invited to play rounders, and it just so happened that everyone who was playing was either in a rock band or a comedian or a DJ. So there was all these people involved in the entertainment and music industry. And I was also somehow, through Melbourne connections, knew Nick Seymour, who played bass in Crowded House. And he became my dad while I was over there, and kind of looked out for me and introduced me to a load of people. One of those people was Flood. And Flood is a producer. And even at the time, I didn't really understand what a producer was. I just knew that he worked in music. But yeah, so I was just surrounding myself with these people who I had never, when I was living in Melbourne, I'd never really experienced that kind of atmosphere or...
Yeah, and while you're playing rounders, which can I just say, I haven't played rounders since primary school, so it's very interesting that it was just a group of adults playing rounders.
I know.
But,
Well, it was rounders that then went on to five-a-side, but for some reason I've blocked out the soccer aspect of the experience. But yeah, so I kind of got like a bit of a hunger for live music and the idea of working in the music industry. And after meeting Flood, I was like, oh, maybe I could work in the music industry too. And he said, well, figure out what it is that you want to do because, you should go and join some bands and write songs. And I know that you'll enjoy writing music and all this sort of stuff because if you want to do what I do, it's sort of a big sacrifice and it also is not about you. It's a very different discipline to the other things that you've been exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I did. I went back to Melbourne and I finished my degree and I ended up doing my master's, sort of, which took an extra year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And at which point Flood had sort of been checking in, and once I'd finished, he said, right, well, I've got a possibility for you to come and work for me, or an opportunity for you to come and work for me. So I did, and I moved over here to London, thinking I'd just try it for 6 months because I was working at an architecture firm at the time as well, and they was quite encouraging, and they were sort of like, obviously your heart is sort of somewhere else. You should go and try it and either get it out of your system or you'll find out that this is the thing that you want to do.
Mm.
And it turns out that it is the thing that I want to do. And yeah, that was nearly 15 years ago.
Amazing. And at this stage, you hadn't formally learnt anything in music or had you?
I've been playing the piano since I was 4 and I did grades and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think I sort of stopped that when I was 15, probably because I discovered boys and didn't want to practice anymore.
Fair enough.
But yes, but I think at school I wrote music for school orchestra and stuff like that.
Right.
And I can't remember. I have no idea how I used to be able to score music, but I used to have that skill.
Yeah.
And I understood how to read music. I don't have that anymore. And I'm not that great on the piano either. But I know enough, to be able to communicate chords. And and on the odd occasion, I'll sort of randomly have perfect pitch, but that's very rare.
Yes. Okay. That's really cool. It's cool to see, that you started in something totally different and where you've ended up now. So I personally, I am an accountant, so that's what I studied, and I worked in corporate accounting for a while, and now I'm doing something totally different. So it's funny how life kind of takes you in a different path, and where you end up. So yeah.
I think personally it's really cool. Like when I hear about someone who has been working in say a very highly paid and respected career and profession, but they're not happy and they're not in love with it. I feel very lucky that I had that opportunity and then was able to do that. But I was younger then and I was sort of a bit braver. So when I hear about my friends who are sort of, maybe later on in life make that change, I think it's so fucking cool.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I think it takes a lot of courage to veer off a trajectory that is sort of safe.
Yeah.
To kind of to follow your passion and your dreams, no matter how hard it is, because it was definitely hard.
Yeah. 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 We're kind of veering off, but I've never had so much uncertainty in my life, really, and you go from having a pretty well paid position to something that it's very much. You just don't know where your next paycheck is coming from. Yeah. And but it doesn't matter because I don't know, I feel so much happier. I know that I'm doing something more that's in line with who I am as a person. But anyway,
I think it is because I remember even when I was studying architecture, getting up and doing presentations, I couldn't. There's a lot of bluffing that goes on in the music industry, but I couldn't bluff my way through the architecture presentations because there was something missing. It sort of felt like it was much more clinical, whereas I'm way more passionate about music, and I love talking about music, and I love communicating about music. So even though I went from a well-paid job as being an architect to not making any money for about 10 years.
Yeah.
Also being treated like shit a little bit.
Yeah.
We're making tea in recording studios for years and just sort of slowly kind of climbing my way through the ranks.
Yeah. And I can really relate to that because similar thing, in my previous career, like I'd be in a meeting room of like 10 people and then it'd be my turn to talk and I'd almost get anxiety and I'm not really that kind of person.
Yeah.
So I found that very strange, but now like I'm doing workshops. The last one, there were 100 people in the room and the next one's even bigger and I have no problem with that. I just love it and love talking about this and feel like an hour just flies by as opposed to 2 minutes in that meeting room where I'm feeling a bit anxious. So it's, when you really love it, I think it's a totally different situation.
Yeah.
But so going to our topic, so we are talking about music production and what it is, because I think that is, when you've been doing it for a while, hopefully you know what that is, but it can be a little bit vague as to what exactly it is and what's the job of a producer. So if you were to tell me in one sentence what is music production, then
my gosh.
just starting off really easy.
The funny thing is I get asked this question all the time and every time I'm like, I should probably prepare an answer for this, but I never do. I don't know.
Come on, Catherine.
For me, it's part psychology, part construction and part feelings. I think that's what music.
Well, thanks for not being vague. That was perfect. That really helps.
I think as I've sort of met more producers and traveled the world, there's so many different styles and approaches to production. I mean, being a music producer is essentially kind of helping an artist realize their kind of creative identity and dream, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it would be helpful to talk about what are the main aspects of your job. What do you spend most of your time doing, if you can categorize that into a few things?
I guess I spend time, so it depends. If I'm working with a band, I kind of divide the process of recording an album up into sort of several segments. A lot of it is involved in pre-production. So that's sort of sitting with the band in rehearsal, kind of dissecting the songs, working on the parts, kind of preparing and getting a plan together of what we're going to do in the studio. The studio then becomes like an extension of that once we're in there. And it's because we're so prepared in terms of the songs, the studio for me becomes like a laboratory, a place to experiment. But ultimately, I'm always trying to. There'll be like a spark of a feeling that I'll kind of get from whether I'm watching a band play in the rehearsal room. There's an energy or something that I kind of want to translate through to the speakers, whether it's a mood or imagery or something. So then once we're in the studio, it's how do we then achieve that feeling, or how do we translate that feeling or that mood or that imagery, and how do we communicate that through the speakers without someone having to stand there and explain this is the thing that we're trying to achieve or this is the mood that we're trying to create.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that has a lot to do with sonics and how, a bright guitar can suggest something, or a guitar that's sort of very dull can suggest something else, or, the drum sound or the drum groove can suggest another feeling, or there's a lot of ways to communicate a feeling, and yes, it's kind of massaging the sonics in order to achieve that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's like bringing together all the elements that create
Sound.
What the band is.
Yes.
Yeah, and the sound and the feeling that they're trying to get across into a recording, I guess.
Yes.
Right. So
exactly.
So then there's that part of it.
That's what music production is. That sentence that you just said.
Great. Okay, good. We've got that. That's important. And then you also mentioned psychology. So what do you mean by that?
some of the best artists I've ever worked with, whether they're, highly emotionally sensitive or, we all kind of, this is a creative process. And I mean, even for myself, I suffer from crippling self-doubt on a daily basis, and often the artists do as well.
It helps to hear that, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, God, last Wednesday, I've been working with this artist and talking to the record label, and I knew that there wasn't something right. And I'm very lucky that I have a great relationship with this label. And they were sort of pushing me, but I sort of felt like it was kind of interfering in the process a little bit too early. But actually, for whatever reason, even though on the Wednesday night after this conversation, I was like, God, maybe I should literally give up being a producer. And the next morning, I kind of woke up and I was like, right, I think I know what to do. I've like pinpointed exactly what it is that I need to do. I felt like the song had lacked identity, but I couldn't figure out why I was struggling to kind of find an angle for the song. And once I'd pinpointed that, I found the identity or what the song should kind of look like. And I went into the studio and we kind of nailed it. But yeah, these are, so that's just from me personally. So imagine what the artist is going through when they're, this is their like baby, and it's maybe existed as demos or they've played it live and it's kind of lived and breathed for a period, but all you've ever heard of it is its potential. So suddenly kind of having something that could be the finished product, it's quite nerve-wracking because that's it. That's it. It's out into the wilderness and you have no control over that. Its potential is either realised or it's not as good as you thought. So there's kind of, if I experience self-doubt, often like some of the best artists I've worked with, they will experience that kind of times 100.
Yeah. And that's a really powerful thing to realise. So anyone that's listening to this and, if you are a creative, then I'm 100% sure you've also experienced this as well. And some people have come to me and said, but all the biggest artists, they feel like they're always on it and they're so confident, and it's good to know that everyone's feeling that and it's not just you, and it doesn't matter how experienced you are, we all kind of feel that. Yeah.
Well, because also the sort of confidence crisis, it might manifest itself in other ways, like through anger, they express it through anger or frustration. And so it's just kind of managing that in order to make sure that it's not crippling and creating sort of some sort of block that means that we aren't delivering anything, because often that can happen. And I have worked with many artists like that where just, they're sort of so resistant to do anything at all because of that fear. So that's where the psychology comes in. But also, while there's that side that exists, I always like to make the sessions really fun and enjoyable.
Yeah. And that's so important as well. I feel like once you, I personally find the writing process so fun. And then when you've got to an idea and then trying to realize the potential that you feel it has can just become this process that takes all the fun out of it. And so it's good that you focus on keeping that there throughout the process, because I think that's so important. One thing I wanted to ask you was, how do you think the role of a music producer has changed over the years? Because, so much has changed as far as moving from analog to digital, and especially when you have a band situation compared to now having more electronic elements of it. So how do you think a producer's role has been impacted?
I can only speak from experience. I was trained in a very traditional way. My mentors have been in the industry for over 30 years. So the training is quite vicious, rigorous. You're really sort of taught a discipline, because ultimately the role of the producer back then was the one who sort of was able to manage the budget, the schedule, bringing in all the kind of personnel, the kind of team of people, plus delivering something that was creatively, sonically and amazing. That was the sort of traditional role of the producer, I think. Now, what a producer means could mean a lot of things, because they're self-producers now. The access to the technology is greater. I can sit in here in my little room and program a bunch of drums and soft synths and have a, singer play their guitar, and then we made a track. We don't need to sort of necessarily go into a big expensive studio to do that, but it becomes something else. And then there's producers who write. You don't necessarily need to have the training anymore to be a producer, but that doesn't mean that you're any less of a producer, if that makes sense. And that is something that, I've sort of beginning to understand. There's this girl called Alex Hope in LA. I mean, she's only 25, but she's been killing it for about 7 years.
Wow.
And her ability to kind of carve the fat off anything to just present such a great song kind of blows my mind, and I wish I had that skill. I think my kind of approach is much more of a sonic. I come from more of an engineering background, but then I played in bands and stuff as well and wrote songs, so I kind of understand songwriting, but I wouldn't describe myself as a songwriter, but that is definitely involved in the production. So it's, very different for everyone.
Yeah, and there are so many elements, like you said, and it can be so different in different circumstances depending on what you're doing. But that actually leads in quite well to something else I wanted to talk about how much involvement a producer has in the creative process. So again, that can be different depending on different producers. But in your experience, I guess mostly you work with bands, I would say. So, do you get involved in a lot of the creative process, or do you leave that mainly to the bands?
No, I mean, I'm kind of very heavily involved. So a lot of the artists that I've worked with over the last 5 years have been artists who are just starting. So it's been trying to extrapolate their kind of identity and their sound and helping them develop that, and then forming that relationship with them. I mean, I've been working with an artist called Roman Lewis since he was 15, and he writes beautiful songs but can't necessarily play to a click, or, his song structures are a bit sort of weird, but it's sort of just kind of helping him and guiding him throughout that process. And we've been now working together for 3 years. Or a band like the Amazons, I worked with them from the very beginning, and it's always a lot of phone calls about, demos or song ideas, or even just talking about what's going on in the world and how that informs the songs that they're writing or the things that they're going through. And then, that's sort of talking about being involved in the creative process early on before we've even kind of stepped into the studio. But then, with like the Amazons, they're sort of, when we were in the studio, they were showing me about kind of the new outfits that they'd bought, and how I'm like, that looks amazing, just that kind of level of the kind of whole package. It's not just necessarily about
just
what the sound is or what the music is. It's also not saying that I'm making these decisions, but it's things that I think about that then inform the decisions that I make in the studio to kind of help bring to light the kind of ideas that they've got. So I love those kind of discussions, or talking about a book that they're reading, like a history book on 1950s music or something, and how those kind of, what was going on at that period was like influencing their approach to songwriting even, and just like the way that they stand on stage. I don't know, just all that sort of stuff. Is the visual and the sonic side is just as important, and it helps inform the decisions that I make for them in the studio.
Yeah, you're right. And that is a band, I mean, I was going to say now, but has always been, I guess, right? It's not just the recording, it's also the image that they have, their presence on stage, and all that needs to be cohesive and all work together. So I guess that comes in the production as well. Another thing you mentioned before was that equipment is becoming more and more accessible to people to have at home and on a budget as well. And we're sitting in your studio here. I see a lot of blinking lights and stuff, and I think I probably know about 0.5% of what anything in here does. But there's all this stuff available, but then there's also small budget things that you can get at home. How much do you think a self-producing artist or an artist starting out can achieve in like a, bedroom studio or something? And when do you think it's a good idea for them to involve someone else?
I mean, I've heard stuff that people have done in their bedroom and been like, my God, I'm like so blown away by that. And I think they should just carry on doing that.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that skill. I can't, or at least I've yet to, just with my laptop, create something that I think is awesome. I sort of need, and I guess it's just because it's what I'm used to.
Yeah.
I want my summing mixer because I know how that sounds. I want my 1073 mic pre because I know how that sounds. I want some like fun toys, like some delay and reverb pedals to play around with, because I like things to be tactile.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, these sort of things all depend. Having a producer can kind of help you consolidate the ideas. If you're working in isolation. If you're a band, it's different because you've got people to bounce ideas off. But even when I'm mixing by myself, sometimes I want someone to come in and have a listen just so I can hear it through their ears.
Mm-hmm.
So with someone who's self-producing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it on your own. It just could be better with being able to bounce ideas off someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think anyone working in isolation would probably agree. So, I think it's kind of up to you, or whether you want to involve someone else. But I think it's a smart thing to do to be able to know when you've reached your capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
There are, of course, like people who can do it by themselves and very successfully, but it's also just a very closed mentality if that is like the default.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And you can kind of get into this isolated space as someone working on your own, and that can work for some people, or you can just hit roadblocks. And then in that sense, it's definitely good to get some external people involved. And one thing I just wanted to mention as well, so you were talking about mixing. So for anyone who doesn't know, so at the end of a production session, we'll end up with a bunch of different tracks. Each track would be like a hi-hat or a snare or a vocal track or whatever. And then in the mixing process, we will bring all that in to then end up with one track where all these tracks are kind of working together and at the right levels and all that stuff. So just a quick note there. And I also wanted to ask you, so if there was a new producer or someone thinking about production, then if you had one piece of advice that you'd give them, what would that be?
I always say go and try and make tea for someone in a recording studio, even if you don't plan on getting into that side of things, because for me, just watching other people work and understanding the dynamic of the way people work together in a studio, that's kind of how I've got to this point and able to work with kind of big artists, because you learn this sort of sense of humility, I guess, understanding and patience, which you can't really. If you're self-producing, you can do whatever the hell you want, I think, because you're not dealing with another personality and you're not having to manage another personality. You just have to deal with yourself. But if you are planning on working with other artists, it isn't just a case of just sitting in a room and going and hitting record and going, oh yeah, I think that sounds good. There's like a whole lot of other things that that happen, a lot of other mind games. And I feel like I learnt that from just years of observing. So yeah, but even if it's just for 3 months, just save up some money and go and beg someone to let you do that. And they might pay for your food and your transport. Yeah. And then eventually maybe get you to do something for them and give you some responsibility. But just going to observe is I think that's invaluable.
Yeah. Cool. No, that's very good. So anyone listening, no one is below making tea. So get on that, people.
Ivan walked into Alan Moulder's studio the other day and I was like, can I just come and make tea for you?
Now?
Yeah. Because I needed a break just because of the massive responsibilities that I feel like I'm kind of undertaking. It's just sometimes quite stressful. And just, I mean, I wish I had have kind of enjoyed the moments of not having the pressure of having to deliver.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're envious of that time now. All right, cool. Good to know. Okay, cool. So we have some questions from a few people around the world, which I will get to. So that one, the greatest piece of advice, was something I was going to ask, but it was also a question from a girl named Nino from Chicago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we also have a question from Serenity Blade Music from London. Mm-hmm. So she asked, how techie were you before you started producing?
I was so not techie. I played in a band called the Harlocks in Australia, and my band members had to plug my keyboard in and connect the jack cable to my amp because I didn't understand the difference between input and output.
Okay.
I knew nothing.
All right. So there is hope for anyone that feels they're not a techie person. And
I was musically technical though.
Yeah.
But not technical.
Yeah. No, it's good to know. And I think a lot of people, when they think of the traditional studio and, you know, looking around, that's kind of what you see is just a lot of equipment and
a lot of buttons.
Yeah, a lot of buttons and turning knobs and stuff. And it can be a bit daunting really for someone coming into it, but it's really encouraging knowing that you don't have to be super excited by that stuff before you go in, and once you start learning bits of it, then I'm sure you that excitement comes naturally because you see what it can do.
Yeah.
So that's very encouraging. Next question we have from Dar Bush in Indiana. So she asks, how do you divide time between working on projects, generating ideas, and polishing your own skill set?
I mean, that time really, for me, isn't really divided up. It's all just the same thing. Although, what I do like to do is I like to kind of do co-productions or to kind of learn other skills that I don't necessarily have, or even just sort of going into another producer's room and kind of listening to what they've been doing, and again, it's like the self-producing artist. It's just to kind of expand my knowledge, and you know, I have a process that, you know, I've kind of fall back on, but learning new skills and learning new ideas and other approaches is kind of invaluable as well. Yeah, but I know my time is sort of. It's all together.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And as an artist, like I feel like when I learn most is through collaboration. So working with other people, even if you see how they set up their project or how they go about their songwriting process, you might not end up with something amazing, but it can always be something you learn from. And so it's good to see it's the same in the production world as well. So we have a question from Tamara Scar from London as well. So she said, what is your work routine and when do you know your production is good enough to release?
I mean, I'm not really the one who decides that. There's so many, you know, there'll be record labels and management and bands. Usually I know that it's good when I kind of have that, like the butterflies in my stomach and everyone else in the studio is jumping up and down.
Yeah.
That's when I know that it's done.
Yeah. I mean, whether you're a self-producing artist or a producer, I guess there's some level where you let the project go, you know, whether it's sending it off to a label or in an artist's case, releasing.
Yeah.
I guess it's where do you know that you're happy with everything? Because you can just get in that loop of, oh no, it needs a bit of this and needs a bit of that, and then just not letting it go.
There's something to be. Look, there's two sides of the coin, and I'm eternally sort of in conflict about this. One, sometimes like the initial spark of the idea is like the best moment when the idea sounded the best. But then also being able to have time to kind of refine is also really good.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think just save all your sessions, like save your sort of
All the
accumulative,
previous saves.
and just sort of go back and check that you haven't kind of been destructive throughout the process, and just see if there was sort of. I mean, because I know even for myself there would be like even sort of a shitty demo on a voice memo or something. I'm like, there's something in that has been lost throughout the process. How do I get that back? So those sort of being able to reflect I think is important. And then if you're confident that this is the best kind of version of your idea, then that's probably when it's ready. When you feel like you sort of just there's nothing else left to do. You know, you're not really. You stop thinking about, is that hi-hat too loud, or is that can I hear what all the vocals are? You just sort of like listen to it as a song, as like a finished overall picture.
Yeah,
that's when it's a good time to let that baby go.
Yeah. All right. So anyone that's struggling to get there is a point where you get to that you're happy with anything, or even maybe it's a good time to send it off to a couple of people whose ears that you really trust and
play it to some friends or whatever. Play it to your mum.
Yeah.
See what your mum thinks.
Yeah, exactly. Good advice. So the last question we have from Tiana Papel from Melbourne. So she asks, what are your greatest challenges when working with others?
Patience.
Okay.
If I'm tired and a bit grumpy and everyone else is dealing with their own shit and it's sort of getting kind of lumped on me because I'm the one who's kind of seen as the person who can take it, which is exactly what I should be. But I'm sort of dealing with my own kind of concerns about what's going on, or even just if something else is going on in my life and I'm working 7 days a week and I'm in the studio 14 hours a day. I have to kind of really stop myself from kind of walking out the door and, slamming it behind me in order to, or if like a band like are refusing to play, or they're sort of mucking around in watching TV or playing video games or something, and I get frustrated. Yeah, just having the patience that there's sometimes like work can't continue all the time that you're in the studio. Sometimes having a little break is okay for the artist. I have to. So yeah, that's probably my biggest challenge, to not be a bitch.
Okay, right, okay. Yep, no, good to know.
I mean, but in all seriousness, like that, I do suffer from a lot of self-doubt and trying to not make that visible. Because a lot of this job is about instilling trust in so many people. And, I'm dealing with a lot of people who look to me to kind of find the solution. I mean, it's a collaborative process, but ultimately, like, that's my, I'm getting paid for that. So, yeah, it's kind of dealing with that and just knowing that is just part of the process and we'll get there eventually, and not let it kind of block me. Yeah.
Do you have any kind of daily routines or anything that you go through to manage that?
I did yoga for ages, but I've just started going to the gym. I've got a personal trainer.
Oh, yeah?
But it's made such a difference.
Really?
Because last year I was so exhausted that I'd get up and get dressed in 15 minutes and go to the studio. I mean, that was kind of my life for a year. I had three weekends off or something stupid like that.
Jesus.
So I didn't do any exercise. But now just sort of forcing myself to either walk around the block or go for a walk for 45 minutes or something, just to kind of clear my head and just get the endorphins pumping. I mean, I know it's such a cliche, but yeah, exercise has kind of changed my mindset, because at least I walk into the studio being a lot more positive and feeling like I can take on the day. And it also just gives me more energy, and I'm able to kind of last the distance. without coffee or chemicals.
Oh, yeah. Good to know. Yeah, for sure. I think that's really important to see what works for you and kind of stick with that. So, I'm a strong believer of everything is connected, your physical, how you feel physically and mentally, and how that translates into whatever you're doing. And for me, it's meditation in the morning or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And since I started making a habit of that, I definitely find a huge difference in how I can deal with situations and not get overwhelmed in certain things. And yeah, some people aren't really sure how all that's connected, but I would challenge you to give it a try to anyone, because just whether it's something like meditation or going to the gym or being active or whatever it is, because everyone needs that bit of downtime and time away from whatever they're doing.
Yeah, just something for yourself that isn't related to music. I mean, I hate being told what to do. So if, my parents are like, oh, you should just, maybe exercise, it'll help you feel better. I'd be like, no, that's not going to make a difference. I'm just so tired. I'm working 16-hour days. You don't understand. I mean, but of course they're right. But I had to arrive at that decision by myself. Oh my God, that's almost like what production is, because you can't ever tell an artist this is what you've got to do. You've got to let them arrive at that decision by themselves. Yeah, I need someone who can produce me. Actually, I have a friend who he always says, oh, I've just heard this band. You'll really hate them. I don't think you should listen to them. That's how he gets me to listen to a band. Yeah.
Okay, right. So what's that called?
Reverse
psychology.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And it's funny how time goes by and you realize, or I'm realizing anyway, I'm like, my parents are smarter than I gave them credit for. Everything they said slowly comes to reality.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right, cool. Well, we will leave it at that. But thank you so much, Catherine. It's been amazing chatting to you and so inspirational hearing about your journey and how you've got to where you are. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. And have a great day.
You too.
Bye.